Good morning. My name is Brendan O'Shea. I'm a general practitioner and my practice is about 50 kilometres over that way.
I'm Sharon McWeeney, a patient of Dr. O'Shea's, and here to discuss my experience with my parents passing.
So we have three beautiful people for you. Have you noticed how the world is actually full of beautiful people? There are three beautiful people, three case histories really, including Kathleen, Ellen and Michael, Kildare people really, of one kind or another by various routes. This session is on over-medicalisation. We really have a painful knowledge around over-medicalisation. Maybe it's in the space next door to medical assistance in dying. So there are three cases. So in one case, things worked out probably well, and in two of the cases, things worked out remarkably difficultly, which is a polite way of putting it. And these patients lived in the same community, had access to the same general practice, to the same hospitals, to the same services. Kathleen, all three of them were in their middle 80s. She was an absolutely fantastic, typical Irish mum, and it was a matriarchy, and she was absolutely at the top of it for several decades. But as to all of us, her time became more medically complex. All of these three patients had the same typical comorbidities. The idea that she might die sent an absolute tremor throughout the various generations of the family. How could we possibly discuss this? As her frailty progressed, we spent a huge amount of money. We did 4 GP house calls. We had the public health nurse visit a few times. We had an end-of-life conversation, and one of the takeaways we'd like you to take away is think ahead. You've got a detail on it. It's produced by the Irish Hospice Foundation. Justin referred to it. This is what it looks like. And in one of the house calls, we left think ahead, much to the chagrin of the family, and came back 2 weeks later. And Kathleen took and made the running. I know I'm going to die shortly. Everybody was astounded in the family group. But she and her family went through think ahead, and they made the key decisions. Her ending was very straightforward, arguably. It became very obvious, it was clear, it was accepted. The correct nursing care was put in place for the last 4 or 5 days. The wonderful advanced nurse practitioner from the palliative care service set up a syringe driver. All the tender conversations were had in those last weeks. She died at home. Your counterpart, Marie, who was the daughter of the house, subsequently has spoken that she felt initially terrified, but subsequently profoundly validated. Cost to the health system, very little. When it works well, it can really work well. But in the same neighbourhood, 2 miles away, we have Ellen in her middle 80s, and handing it over to you going into the last fateful couple of days. Towards the end of the pandemic, she experienced an acute respiratory tract infection. We did a telephone consultation from the practice, and for a number of reasons, we didn't have these conversations. So she was set on Friday and commenced on antibiotics and steroids. Tell us what happened on Saturday and the following days. Tell us a little bit about Ellen.
Okay, where do I start? Basically, Mum was diagnosed with COVID and hospitalised in her last few days. I had been told 24 hours after she'd been put into the hospital that she was recovering and that I should expect to come and collect her 24 hours after that. I also had COVID at this time. So I was preparing for that, and then about 12 hours after one conversation, I received another to say that she had deteriorated and I needed to get to the hospital now. I explained that I had COVID, and they said, doesn't matter, get here now. So my father was at home with my teenage son. My father had Parkinson's disease and Lewy body syndrome dementia. So my 17-year-old son was left to look after him while I made for the hospital. And when I got there, they had moved Mum from a 6-bed ward to a single room, and I was asked to begin end-of-life procedures pretty much on arrival at the hospital, which was a complete shock because I had anticipated bringing her home. I don't know really what happened. I was asked continuously. I was given statistics that she had a 70% chance of survival, 60%, 50%. It seemed to be going down with each conversation. Mum was as close to me as you are, in the bed. She may have had her eyes closed, but I was aware that she was listening because I had been her carer for 10 years, so I knew she wasn't asleep. And although she was unable to speak, she was aware of what was going on, even though she also had dementia. So, at some level. So, I wasn't comfortable having the conversations so close to her. I was feeling very pressured. I was shocked. And after some time and discussions with you, where we tried to actually have her moved to a specialised palliative unit, but the hospital wouldn't release her for that to happen. They were insistent that she wouldn't survive the journey between the two, even though it was probably a 15, 20-minute drive. They were insistent that no end-of-life procedures needed to be done, and I was the one that had to give the permission for it, and when was I going to do that? So I was feeling kind of under pressure. Then I honestly think Mum took it out of my hands. She ripped the cannula out of her arm, and I took that as a sign that she was ready to go. So I allowed them to begin the end-of-life procedures. And they told me she'd be gone in 3.5 days, and if there was anybody I needed to have there to say goodbye, I should get on it. And basically I was left then sitting in a chair beside her for 3 days in a bed until she passed.
So we would contrast some of the things that happened, and that it is the Swiss cheese model of a medical catastrophe, that so many different things line up. So care was transferred. Our last contact with Ellen was on the Friday. She was subsumed acutely into the acute hospital system. She was cannulated. She was really given forced oxygen therapy to keep her O2 sats up. Mm-hmm. And my recollection of those 5 or 7 days, it was profoundly traumatic for everybody involved. Yes. It was 5 inpatient days in a hospital, and the cost to the state of all of that for a particularly absolutely lousy, dreadful outcome. She went in at the weekend. There was no senior palliative care clinician there at the weekend to guide the juniors and the nursing staff. So this was the juggernaut of medical care. This, my friends, is over-medicalisation at end of life. Everybody is unique. Ellen and Michael, who we're coming to next, spent a good deal of their life in Australia. They were incredibly fit people. They were 87 and they were now very, very frail. So there we have what happened to Ellen. Michael's story is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. He left the practice because his care was transferred from the home, the beautiful home that you've been in with Liam and Ellen, yeah, to a local nursing home. Mm-hmm. And so he, by definition, changed GP as well at the same time. What happened to Michael?
Dad was, from August after Mum passed in 22, he was in the nursing home. He was a character and he seemed to eat more for me than he would for any of the other staff, etc. So I used to go out there twice a day to feed him and to be company for him. And I don't know if anybody knows about Lewy body syndrome, but it's particularly aggressive. Their personality becomes very aggressive. So it wasn't easy, but we managed, and I was there literally every day. Thankfully, it was 10 minutes drive from home, so that was handy. So it was just over and spend time with him. And the very end, again, came as a shock because Dad had a bit of a Lazarus complex in that he seemed to be going and then he'd come back. And then he'd seem to be going and he would come back. And then I think it was around, he passed in April, so it was around Easter. I actually got there at lunchtime to find 2 staff members, and this had been 3 months, like Christmas time, since he'd actually been more than from bed to bed, and actually on his feet, and this big grin on his face because the two nurses were holding him up and he was walking, sort of, with their very much support. I was shocked because 2 weeks later, he was back in the bed and transferring to the chair. From the Friday, I wasn't able to feed him anything. I was concerned about any liquids, trying to keep him hydrated, uncomfortable. But again, I wasn't thinking this is the end. I thought this was just another part of Dad's journey. So as part of being in the nursing home, I was presented with pages of information. Again, shockingly, one day they said, "You must complete this." And I was like, "What is this?" It was an end-of-life procedure. What would I want for Dad's final days? So I completed that, saying just some big band music played low because he loved big band music, and myself to be there 24/7, holding his hand, talking to him, and for him to be as comfortable as possible. No medical intervention. I actually signed that off, and that is what I expected.
You signed that off repeatedly.
I signed it off repeatedly. Every 6 months I was presented with these same...
It was repeatedly stated,
3
we're
times.
not for active management. Mm-hmm. What happened?
From that Friday, he would respond to me in that he would move but not communicate. So I was registering that I was believing he was registering that I was there. I wasn't able to give him anything to eat or drink. I noticed that the staff must have been giving him something because there was pink stained things on the top of the sheet. So I'm assuming they were trying to put liquid into his mouth or something, that like gelatin that would dissolve or something. Although there was very little communication with the staff because, again, my parents both chose the weekend to do these things. And on the Sunday, I left there at 6:30 p.m. after my second visit for the day. And at 9:30, I received a panic call from a young member of staff who I didn't recognise, saying that they were calling an ambulance for my father to have him transferred to the local hospital. And they said that his blood pressure was low, but his heart rate was high. And I said, "Well, don't you just want to put him on an intravenous drip there and get some more fluid into him? Because perhaps he's dehydrated from the last 3 days." And I have no medical background. Right? This is just something that I noticed from other people in the home. And I saw that they had the capacity to do this. She didn't seem to comprehend what I was saying. She said that an ambulance had been called. I asked, should I go to the hospital, which was 10 minutes this way, or to the nursing home and travel with him 10 minutes that way. She said hospital, so I went to the hospital. An hour and a half later, I'm still pacing up and down in the A&E ward, thinking, where is my father? Trying to get them on the phone. The ambulance came in at about 10:30, 11 o'clock that night, and I noticed that I didn't see him, but I could see someone coming off the back of the ambulance from where I was standing. About 5 to 10 minutes later, I was brought out the back. I wasn't allowed to go through to where he was. They were trying to direct me to a side room. I didn't need that. It's pretty tough. They thought us tough in Australia. And anyway, so I was like, just let me into him. I've cared for the man for 10 years. I can deal with this. No, we must tell you that, he's coming to end of life, and do you want us to stop any intervention? And I said, stop any intervention? 3 times I've filled out forms to say no intervention. And the man who stood in front of me was a doctor, and he went as white as that tablecloth. He could not believe that I had said, do not resuscitate 3 times, and that it had been ignored. So they finally let me through. Well, actually, they didn't. I pushed my way through. And I got in there. There was 20 people around the table where my dad was. There was a trach tube down his throat, bagged on the side of his head. And, it was pretty traumatic. And I was just going, what are you doing, people? And then they all slowly disappeared. It was quite, There was 2 people then left with me who were of non-English speaking background, begging me not to remove the trach tube, which, I was trying to do because I didn't want my last image to be this. Because he was tiny, he'd shrunk to 42 kilos, so there was very little of him left.
So this is all very recent.
April.
So he had been subjected to very aggressive resuscitation for 1.5 to 2 hours. And we could detail the procedures around that. It's quite gruesome. But this is in Ireland. This happened. It's happening. It's happening. Justin referred to the conversations we've had, the extensive, long, protracted process around the Assisted Capacity Decisions Bill, where we are supposed to be having these conversations. But this is still what's happened. It's important to know about it. As a GP, it appears to me as a phenomenon to be very transient, quick, and really energetic and destructive over-medicalisation at end of life. So in terms of what we could leave you with, these conversations are very important. In the practice, we do our significant incident review. We felt dreadful in the practice about what happened to these two beautiful people. And we can understand why they happened. But the system absolutely requires to change. Getting down to the last words, we have our last words for you. Sharon has the absolute last word. The penultimate last word is this: over-medicalisation is almost certainly going on wherever you come from. And when you go back to there, will you ask yourself, will you look out for it? Will you take a position against it? It's expensive, it's cruel, it's dehumanising. But what is really the last word?
I would hope that people would listen to the person, listen to their family, and when they take the trouble of actually completing a plan, to make sure that it's implemented and respectfully delivered.
Thank you so much.